What is going on, YouTube, and welcome back to another video. In today's video, we're going to be talking about books. That is right. Today is January 18th, so we just started a new year, and the same thing happens every single year at the beginning of the year. A lot of people are fired up about their goals, so what they do. I get asked a lot, especially around the New Year's, what books I would recommend. And that's a very big question because there's not really one specific answer. So a lot of you guys have been asking me, please do a video on what books you would recommend or what your favorite books are, top books, all that stuff. So the way today's video is going to work is I'm going to actually talk about how I got into reading, how many books I have read, how I categorize different books that I read, and then what books I would recommend for someone just starting out, and then how often I read. So first off, how did I get started on reading? First of all, in high school, I hated reading. I never read. I spark notes the mess out of everything. I did not like reading books at all. It wasn't until I was probably about 20, I want to say 22, 23, so probably about maybe 10 years ago, maybe a little over 10 years ago, my cousin AJ, he recommended that I read a book called Think and Grow Rich. And when I heard that, I got very excited because it talks about growing rich. And at 22, I wanted to make a lot of money, so I was like, let me read this book. So that's going to be the first book that I recommend, and the reason why is because it drastically changed my life. You took someone who never read and only read when they had to read. Well, actually, that's not true. There was one series that I really enjoyed reading, and that was the Harry Potter books when I was in the 5th grade. That was like a book that I could actually dive into, read, and I really enjoyed. And then there was a huge gap from 5th grade to 22 that I never read. But the first book, let me show you what it looks like. This was the very first book I ever bought on my own free will. Think and Grow Rich by Napoleon Hill. It's not a very big book. That was another thing that was very attractive to me. It was not too hard for me to read. I read this book and I knocked it out probably in about a week or so. So that was a huge accomplishment for me. But once I read it, then I reread it, and I think since then I've read it probably about 7 or 8 times. I actually reread it once every year. And this would be categorized as like a personal development book. And the reason, so I have different categories. I'll go through them as I recommend different books. Personal development book is going to be like a book that kind of covers all aspects of the other groups. So let me get my notes. The way I break it down, I think there's different books that I at least enjoy reading, and they're all different groups. So when someone says, hey, what book would you recommend? It kind of depends on what you're looking for. So I read books on mindset. I read books on goal setting. I read books on leadership. I read books on your attitude. I read motivational books. I read communication and relationship books. I read personal development books, which, again, a personal development book kind of encompasses all the categories I just said. And then recently I added this one, which is fatherhood. And when I read this book, the reason why I changed my mindset is it talked about things I never learned in like high school or at the time college. It talks about goal setting. It talks about mindset. It talks about belief. It talks about affirmations. It talks about how to communicate with people. It talks about how to make money. Just things that I was very interested in but never learned. So I started reading a lot of books. So once I read this book, then Amazon, obviously it says like, you may like this book. And I literally just went through a phase where I just started buying books. I actually just counted all my books. I have 3 bookshelves, and they are all pretty much full. I need to get another bookshelf. But I counted all my books this morning. I asked Cassie how many books you think I have. She was way off. She underestimated how many books I have. She said 150. I actually currently have 412 books in my library. Obviously, I accumulated that over the years. So if you figure I've been reading for about 10 years, it basically breaks down to about 41 books per year. Within the first couple years of reading, like I said, I am an addictive person, so when I started reading this stuff and started like really diving into it, I'm like, oh my gosh, I just want to soak in as much information as I can. There was a point where I was reading about 50 books a year. Now I'll talk about kind of my strategy for reading and how it kind of changed since then. But I was very fascinated by it. I would read in the morning. I'd read on my break at work. I would read before I went to bed. At the time, Cassie was going through nursing school, so she was studying, and I was just reading personal development books. So this was the first book I read. And what I started reading, there was something that kept coming up in every book, and it was like, first of all, it said, leaders are readers. Now, just because you're a reader doesn't mean you're quote unquote a leader, but if you are a leader, then you are a reader, if that makes sense. I know it's kind of confusing. And then I would see stuff that, like, when you walk into a successful person house, they always have a library. So I kept hearing this stuff, like successful people read, leaders read, good communicators read, and it's because, like I said, you're getting information. I like to think of it as, they say you are who you hang out with. Your five, if you take like your 5 closest friends, your personality is probably like all of those 5. Or if you take your 5 closest friends and average their income, that's your income. So I like to see it as like, and they say who you surround yourself with, kind of depends on your success and all that stuff. So I kind of see it as like, I got a library of people here who have a lot of knowledge that I'm able to tap in every single day. I got the Tony Robbins, I got the David Goggins, I got the John C. Maxwells, I got the Napoleon Hills. I got all these people literally right on my bookshelf. So it's like, if I ever want to tap into a conversation with them, they're literally 5 feet from me. So that's kind of my journey of how I started reading. And now I'm pretty much reading probably a book every 2 weeks, maybe a book every week, once a week. But let me kind of break down what my top books are that I recommend. I actually keep them on the top shelf of my bookshelves, because I think, like, when it comes to alcohol, I think that all this good stuff's on the top. So this is my top shelf when it comes to books. I'm not going to go through all of them because I probably have about 40 books that I recommend. So I'm just going to kind of name off a couple of them. All right, so the first book I read after Think and Grow Rich, which I highly recommend, this is what I consider a communication/relationship book, and that is How to Win Friends and Influence People in the Digital Age. So Dale Carnegie is like the guru when it comes to speaking, communicating, making people like you, building relationships. I think this is a phenomenal book. I feel like every student of mine in high school should actually read this book, just because of how people should communicate. The digital age obviously has to do with like social media and things you could do also. Another phenomenal book. Another book by Napoleon Hill. I read a couple of his. I just grabbed some right off the top shelf to kind of actually show you. I really liked this one. This is called Napoleon Hill, Outwitting the Devil Within. Very interesting book. It actually was not released until after Napoleon Hill passed away. Apparently it was written a very long, like while he was alive, but he did not release it. Because it is kind of an interesting book. Basically, Napoleon Hill is having a conversation with the devil. And the way it's written is actually kind of eerie, because you literally feel like he is talking to the devil. But he asks the devil, like, why do you put, lack of belief in people? Why do you make people think that there's not enough, abundance in the world? And basically how the devil capitalizes on people without goals, who aren't positive, and when you are like that, he's able to come in and basically take over. Very interesting book. Let's see. This book, great book, Awaken the Giant Within. Tony Robbins is obviously Tony Robbins. If you don't know who Tony Robbins is and you're trying to get into personal development, you're going to learn out who he is. Very informative text. You could actually see that I've highlighted a good amount of stuff in this book. What I like about Tony Robbins is he does a great job of basically giving you a story and then tying in basically how you're able to use that. So a little bit thicker of a book. Really highly recommend that one. This book that I just grabbed, which I've recommended in one of my previous videos. So, oh wait, I didn't tell you. So this one is a personal development book. This one is a personal development book because, again, it encompasses all of those. This was probably if you're looking for a book about fatherhood, just being a strong man for your wife and your children. Highly recommend this. Hard Times Create Strong Men. Phenomenal book. They do have some like graphic pictures in there, so make sure you don't keep this away from your children. Really good book when it comes to fatherhood. This book that I just finished, which I actually recommended prior, phenomenal book. This book's called The Biology of Belief. This book is all, I would break this down into the mindset category. So again, if someone's asking me like, hey, what books would you recommend? I always ask them like, well, what books are you looking for? Are you looking for an overall like personal development that talks about goals, attitude, all that stuff? Are you looking at one that's just for your mindset? This would be a mindset book because it really breaks down belief and how your personal belief can affect your health. It can affect your relationships. It can affect your success in life. So that would be a mindset book. Which brings me to my next one, which I am currently reading, and I highly recommend this book. It's called The Happiness Advantage. This one is, again, mindset, and it's very, probably, I don't know, like I said, I'm reading it right now, so I might be a little biased. I feel like it's one of the best books I've read on when it comes to mindset, your belief, and basically how if you view things and you are an optimistic, happy person, you will attract success in your life. A lot of people think that once you become successful, then you'll be happy. This basically gives proof and studies of people that like have achieved success based on how happy they've been. And you guys can see, so this is another thing, when it comes to how I read now, you will see these on a lot of my books. Okay, and what these are is, as I'm reading something, if I come across something that I think is very interesting, this tab. So I could go to this tab and then I have this section highlighted, which this brings me kind of a little off topic. Oh no, I lost my book spot. Oh, that's terrible. I just took out my bookmark. Whoopsie. Oh, I know where it was. This brings me to my next part, which how I basically take notes. So in the very beginning, when I would read books, I would just highlight. That's all I would do. I would just go through and highlight certain passages. So for instance, Napoleon Hill, when I look at that, there's no tabs, but there is some stuff in here that is highlighted. What I just recently started doing, so I went through different stages. I would highlight stuff, but with no way of actually finding it. Then there was a part where I'd actually highlight it and then journal it. So I'd recopy what I wrote, and then I have a couple journals of like all the key takeaways and stories that I have in here. And then I would digitize it. So then like it got to a point where as I'm reading, if I find something I like, I had a Google Docs that I would basically copy the quote or section from the book, and then I would just put a page number, Napoleon Hill, page 20, paragraph 3. So that as I'm going through it, I could just go to my book. If I need different things basically about mindset, a story about belief, a story about attitude, all these things, I could go to my Google Docs, see that section, and pull from different books. I know it was a little bit weird, but it was like, that worked for me. What I've been doing now, which I really, really like, is like I said, I just do these little tabs. And then once I finish this book, or any book, I go back through and I reread all the tabs. So basically, I reread all the important takeaways. And then what happens is on my shelf, I have a lot of books with these little tabs. So sometimes I'll go back through, I'll just grab a book. Like if I say, hey, I'm gonna reread through this book, I don't read the entire book. I just read all my little key takeaways. Something that I just started doing, which I highly recommend if you're starting to read, highlight certain things, because highlight, put some tabs, whatever, just so you can track important things that you're reading. All right, let me give you guys a couple more books and then we'll wrap up this video. Alright, another person who I really liked his books. Once I read one book by him, I literally just started ordering all his books. And what I like about him is he always has like hardcovers. He's a phenomenal writer, and that is John C. Maxwell. So he has this happen a lot. I think I've actually read every single book by John C. Maxwell. I highly recommend him. But he does this a couple times where you get like 3 books in one. So this book is The Winning Attitude, Developing the Leaders Around You, Becoming a Personal Influence. I actually like the way his books are written. Big words. Sometimes he has like diagrams, stuff like that. Chapter overviews. Just a phenomenal writer. So that would be personal development. This book right here, which I highly recommend, you actually probably have heard of it before. It's called The Alchemist. I actually read this in my English class with my freshman last year. This would just be like a mindset. Actually, this would be like a motivational book because you read it and you just feel good afterwards. It's a good story. They actually were supposed to make it into a movie. I wish they would have. But that would be motivational. This is another book that I highly recommend. I've read this book like probably 4 times already. It's a shorter book, but I really just like it. I would classify this one personal development and mindset. It's called The Subtle Art of Not Giving a... Well, you know. Really well written. But like I said, it's a quick, easy read. But probably one of my favorite books. I recommend this book a lot to a lot of people. This book is... This is a mindset book, and then honestly like a parent, fatherhood book. I read this book, and this just blew my mind with all the stats and everything. As you can see, this book has a lot of different tabs. This book is called The Coddling of the American Mind. How good intentions and bad ideas are setting up a generation for failure. This one will blow your mind with just stats and different things where it comes. It honestly kind of changed how I was even parenting Adeline. Who's Adeline? Parenting Adeline at the time, just because some of the things I was doing, I was like, oh, I'm doing exactly what it says not to do. Which leads me to my next point. You should be reading. If you are a father, if you are a husband, you should be reading. And the reason you should be reading is because you need to learn how to be a good husband, how to be a good father, and the traits that a good husband and a good father have. Communication, leadership, empathy, sympathy, all these things, how to communicate. There have been certain situations where I got into an argument with Cassie, or me and Cassie got into it, and after we got into it, I realized I was wrong, and then I'm reading a book or something, and the book literally talks about like what we just had, and if I would have read that book, I would have been able to handle the situation and realized I was wrong. There's been situations where a situation arises, whether I'm talking to Adeline, whether I'm talking to Cassie, whether I'm talking to a student or someone I work with, and as it's arising, I'm like, oh my gosh, I just read about this. Now I know how to act. Now I know what situation I am. Now I know why they're thinking that way or why I'm thinking this way. But if I don't read that, now if you're not developing this and working on yourself, then you're really only learning by trial by fire or by making mistakes, which, I mean, there's some truth to that I think you should obviously learn by getting out there, making mistakes, and being in the game. But why would you not prep for the game, if that makes sense? Why would you not read about your opponent or how to possibly win the game so that when you're in the game, there is going to be situations that arise that you've already read about and you know how to handle. There's going to be situations that you haven't read about, you haven't watched film on, and you have to learn how to handle in that situation, and then after the game you analyze it and you come back. But I'd much rather go into the game of life prepared because I'm fortifying my mind. And that's why every morning I'll tweet or I'll put on my Instagram like fortifying my mind. This is definitely a mindset one called Feeling Good. The New Mood Therapy. It breaks down just all different ways of why people think a certain way. Very science-based book. This would be a mindset book. And then my last two, like I said, I got a lot, but this will give you guys, if you guys are just looking out to get started on reading, like I said, these are some good ones to get you going. Brian Tracy, I forgot to mention him. He is a phenomenal writer, writes a lot of good books. He was a salesman, so a lot of his books, if you're in sales or anything like that, phenomenal books. This one is called Maximum Achievement. This is a personal development book because, again, it kind of breaks down everything. Breaks down mindset, how to raise your kids, goal setting. Really good book. So I'd highly recommend this one as for overall. And then another John C. Maxwell book, Failing Forward. And just right here, I read on the back, the difference between average people and achieving people is their perception of and response to failure. So that is about it. Those are all the books. Like I said, I got 410 books, so I'm not going to go through all of them, but you got books to definitely get you started. Comment below if you guys have any books that you would highly recommend. I'd be curious to see if you recommend one that I haven't read. That's what I'm always looking for. Because pretty much every year, like I said, I'm ordering about 40 books a year. And usually I'll type in like top personal development books, top relationship books, top mindset books, top goal setting books, just different things like that. So if you guys are interested and would like to know like, hey, what's your top goal setting book or top relationship book, fatherhood book, whatever that is, comment below and I'll give you a couple of them. Because like I said, I just gave you guys some good books, but there is obviously a lot of books that I could recommend. Out of the 412 books, I'd probably say I got 100 that I definitely have read twice and would highly recommend, and then 300 of them were just like a good read. A lot of them, the problem is when you start reading a lot, you'll start to realize, especially if you read the same stuff from the same author, a lot of the stories repeat. You kind of get like, oh, I've heard this before. But what I get excited about is when I come across something that someone has said it before, but this author says it a way that makes sense to me. So that basically, I think I covered everything. I covered how I started. I covered the different books I recommend. I covered the different genres I read. I covered how I read. Again, get yourself Post-it notes, a highlighter. And then I would create a schedule. Just like you have probably a schedule of working out, I would start with a schedule of, hey, I'm going to read 10 pages a day. That's a very common thing I see with a lot of people. If they've never read before, it's like, oh, I'm going to read when I wake up. I would also have a set spot that you like to read that has your highlighters, your Post-its right next to it, so that when you sit down in there, it's kind of like, hey, this is my spot to read. I have one right here. But I honestly have read so long that if I'm going to the doctor's or if I'm going somewhere that I know I'm going to be sitting for a while, I literally bring a book, also just to try and stay off my phone. So anyways, it's 2025. I hope this helps you guys. I hope you guys go out there and buy some books. If you guys have any questions, like I said, comment below. Make sure you guys give this video a thumbs up. I appreciate all the support. We are trying to grow this channel, and personal development, like I said, is huge. So the fact that I've had a lot of the community reach out asking what books I would recommend gets me fired up, because that means there's a community that are trying to get better. And by reading books, I think that is the easiest way to tap in and level up as a person. So you guys already know the motto: stay happy, stay healthy, and above all, don't be average. Now go buy yourself a book.